The Riddle of Larchwood Hall, a chilling Agatha Christie-style mystery unveiled. Part 1. In the crisp October of 1924, when the mists curled like spectres over the Devonshire moors, Larchwood Hall stood as a monument to a bygone era. The Jacobean manor, with its mullioned windows and weathered sandstone, loomed over the hamlet of Netherwold, its chimneys piercing the sky like silent sentinels. Once the pride of the Haverford family, the hall had fallen into genteel disrepair, its tapestries frayed and its corridors draughty. The villagers spoke in hushed tones of the Haverfords' misfortunes, a string of untimely deaths, whispered debts, and a family crypt said to be cursed. It was to this melancholy pile that a small, unlikely party converged, drawn together by an invitation as cryptic as it was irresistible. The occasion was the 70th birthday of Lady Beatrice Haverford, the last surviving Haverford and a figure of formidable presence. Widowed for 2 decades, with no children to inherit her burdens, Lady Beatrice was known for her sharp tongue, sharper mind, and an eccentric habit of collecting rare manuscripts. Her invitation, penned in her precise hand, had summoned 5 guests to Larchwood Hall for a weekend of celebration, and, as it would soon appear, something far more sinister. The letter hinted at an announcement of great import, though its nature remained tantalizingly vague. Each guest, for reasons of their own, accepted. The first to arrive was Miss Clara Pembroke, a spinster of 42 whose prim exterior belied a keen interest in genealogy. Clara had spent years tracing noble lineages for London's elite, and her connection to Lady Beatrice was professional. She had been hired 6 months prior to catalogue the Haverford family papers. Her spectacles gleamed with quiet ambition, for she suspected the manuscripts held secrets that could elevate her modest reputation. Clara stepped from the hired car, clutching her leather satchel, and gazed up the hall with a mixture of awe and unease. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and dying roses. Next came Dr. Lionel Vance, a Harley Street neurologist whose reputation for discretion made him a favorite among the aristocracy. At 50, with silver at his temples and a perpetually furrowed brow, Dr. Vance carried the weight of secrets not his own. His presence puzzled Clara, for Lady Beatrice was famously robust, with no need for a nerve specialist. Yet his invitation had been insistent, and Dr. Vance, who owed the Haverfords a debt from his youth, could not refuse. He arrived by train, his black medical bag swinging at his side, and nodded curtly to Clara as they crossed paths in the gravel courtyard. The third guest was Mrs. Evelyn Strathmore, a glamorous widow of 35 whose sapphire eyes and auburn curls had once set London society ablaze. Evelyn's late husband, a diplomat, had left her a fortune but also a trail of rumors, affairs, espionage, and a mysterious death in Cairo. Her connection to Lady Beatrice was obscure, though some whispered of a shared history in Paris decades ago. Evelyn swept into the hall in a fur-trimmed coat, her smile as enigmatic as the moorland fog, and immediately set the housemaids scurrying to accommodate her trunks. The fourth was Mr. Rupert Caldwell, a jovial antiquarian of 60, whose ruddy cheeks and booming laugh seemed at odds with the hall's somber air. Rupert specialized in rare books and had corresponded with Lady Beatrice for years, though they had never met. His invitation thrilled him, for he hoped to inspect the Haverford collection, rumored to include a lost folio of Chaucer. Yet his hearty demeanor masked a nervous habit of twisting his signet ring, as if he carried a private burden. Last to arrive was Miss Imogen Tate, a young journalist of 26, whose byline in the Clarion had earned her a reputation for exposing frauds and charlatans. Imogen's inclusion was the most perplexing, for Lady Beatrice despised the press. Yet Imogen had received the same invitation, accompanied by a note promising a story worth your ink. Her sharp green eyes missed nothing as she stepped from the pony trap, her notebook already half filled with observations about the hall's Gothic arches and the peculiar tension among the staff. The household itself was small but no less intriguing. Mrs. Agnes Poole, the housekeeper, was a dour woman of 60 whose loyalty to Lady Beatrice bordered on obsession. She moved through the hall like a shadow, her keys jangling at her waist. The butler, Mr. Thomas Finch, was a stooped figure with a limp, his face etched with the stoicism of long service. A single housemaid, Nellie, and a cook, Mrs. Baxter, completed the staff, their whispers in the servants' hall hinting at unease about their mistress's plans. That evening, as the guests gathered in the oak-paneled dining room, Lady Beatrice made her entrance. She was a vision of faded majesty, her silver hair piled high, her black velvet gown adorned with a single emerald brooch. Her eyes, bright and unyielding, scanned the room as if taking measure of each soul. The dinner was lavish, roast pheasant, claret, and a pear tart, yet the conversation was stilted, punctuated by the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of the wind. Lady Beatrice spoke little until the dessert course, when she raised her glass and addressed her guests. "You are here," she said, her voice clear as a bell, "because each of you holds a piece of a puzzle. Tomorrow, I shall reveal a decision that will change the course of this house, and perhaps your lives. But beware, not all is as it seems, and some truths are better left buried." The words hung in the air like smoke. Clara adjusted her spectacles, sensing a challenge. Dr. Vance's fork paused mid-air, his brow creasing. Evelyn's smile tightened, her fingers brushing the pearls at her throat. Rupert chuckled nervously, twisting his ring. Imogen's pencil scratched faintly under the table, capturing every word. After dinner, the guests retired to the drawing-room for coffee and brandy. The atmosphere was strained, each person grappling with Lady Beatrice's cryptic pronouncement. Clara excused herself early, claiming a headache, and slipped upstairs to her room, where she pored over her notes on the Haverford lineage. Dr. Vance lingered by the fire, his thoughts inscrutable. Evelyn and Rupert fell into a lively discussion about illuminated manuscripts, though their laughter seemed forced. Imogen, ever the observer, watched them all, her mind racing with possibilities. At midnight a scream shattered the silence. It came from the library, a vast room lined with leather-bound tomes and dominated by a portrait of the First Lord Haverford. The guests and staff converged, their faces pale in the flickering lamplight. There, slumped in a high-backed chair, was Lady Beatrice, her emerald brooch glinting against her lifeless form. A thin trickle of blood stained her temple, and a brass paperweight lay on the floor beside her. Dr. Vance knelt to examine her, his face grim. "She's dead," he said. "A blow to the head, not more than an hour ago." Mrs. Poole gasped, clutching her keys. Finch's hands trembled as he lit another lamp. Nellie sobbed quietly, while Mrs. Baxter muttered a prayer. The guests exchanged glances, each silently calculating. Imogen's eyes darted to the paperweight, noting its ornate design and the faint smear of blood. Clara's voice cut through the chaos. "We must telephone the police." But Finch shook his head. "The line's down, miss. Storm's knocked it out. We're cut off until morning." A chill settled over the room, deeper than the moorland wind. Lady Beatrice's words echoed in their minds. Some truths are better left buried. Yet one truth was undeniable. Someone in Larchwood Hall was a murderer. Part 2. The library at Larchwood Hall, with its towering shelves and the stern gaze of the Haverford ancestors in their gilded frames, became a stage for suspicion as the clock struck 1. Lady Beatrice's body remained in the high-backed chair, covered now with a velvet throw at Dr. Vance's insistence, though the emerald brooch still caught the lamplight, as if mocking the living. The guests and staff stood in a loose semicircle, their faces a gallery of shock, fear, and guarded calculation. The storm outside battered the windows, sealing them in with the truth. One among them had struck the fatal blow. Dr. Lionel Vance took charge with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to crises. "We must preserve the scene," he said, his voice steady despite the pallor of his cheeks. "No one touches anything until the police arrive. Finch, lock the library door after we leave." The butler nodded, his limp more pronounced as he shuffled to obey. Mrs. Poole's lips tightened, her eyes darting to the paperweight, still lying where it had fallen. Clara Pembroke adjusted her spectacles, her mind already sifting through the evening's events like a ledger. Evelyn Strathmore's fingers toyed with her pearls, her composure a fragile veneer. Rupert Caldwell mopped his brow with a handkerchief, his joviality extinguished. Imogen Tate, ever the journalist, stood slightly apart, her green eyes cataloguing every gesture, every glance. Imogen spoke first, her tone sharp but measured. "We need to establish where everyone was between 11 and midnight. That's when Lady Beatrice was killed, according to Dr. Vance." Her notebook was in hand, though she wrote nothing yet, sensing the room's hostility toward her profession. Mrs. Poole bristled. "You've no right to interrogate us, miss. This is a house of mourning." "Yet a crime has been committed," Clara interjected, her voice calm but firm. "Miss Tate is correct. The police will ask these questions, and we'd do well to have answers ready." Her gaze lingered on Evelyn, whose smile flickered like a candle in a draught. Dr. Vance nodded. "Very well. Let's retire to the drawing room and account for our movements. It's the sensible course." His tone brooked no argument, and the group filed out, Finch locking the library behind them. The drawing room, with its faded damask curtains and a fire that did little to warm the air, felt oppressively small as they arranged themselves on sofas and armchairs. Nellie, the housemaid, was sent to fetch tea, though her hands shook as she left. Mrs. Baxter remained in the kitchen, claiming she was too distraught to join them. Dr. Vance began. "I was in this room until 11:30, reading by the fire. I then went to my bedroom on the second floor. I heard nothing unusual until the scream." His delivery was clinical, but his fingers drummed faintly on the armrest, betraying unease. Clara went next, her account precise. "I left the drawing room at 10:30, citing a headache. I was in my room, reviewing my notes on the Haverford papers, until the scream. My room is on the east wing, near the library. I heard no footsteps or voices. Her eyes met Imogen's, as if daring her to challenge the statement. Evelyn's voice was soft, almost musical, as she spoke. I stayed here with Mr. Caldwell until 11, discussing art and books. Such a charming conversation. She glanced at Rupert, who nodded vigorously. Then I retired to my room in the west wing. I was brushing my hair when I heard the scream. Her story was simple, yet the way she avoided Dr. Vance's gaze suggested layers unspoken. Rupert cleared his throat, his voice too loud in the quiet room. As Mrs. Strathmore said, we talked here until 11. Then I went to my room, also in the west wing. I was reading a monograph on medieval bindings when the scream came. Shocked me out of my wits. He chuckled, then stopped abruptly, realizing the inappropriateness. Imogen's turn came last among the guests. I left the drawing room at 10:45 to explore the hall. I wanted to get a sense of the place for my story. I was in the portrait gallery, just off the main hall, when I heard the scream. I saw no one else. Her frankness drew raised eyebrows, particularly from Mrs. Poole, who muttered about snooping journalists. The staff's accounts were briefer. Mrs. Poole claimed she was in her quarters in the attic, mending a blouse, from 10 onward. Finch said he was in the butler's pantry, polishing silver, until he joined the others at midnight. Nellie, trembling, admitted she was in the servants' hall, eavesdropping, she confessed, on the guests' conversation until she went to bed at 11. Mrs. Baxter, when summoned, said she was in the kitchen all evening, preparing breakfast trays, and heard nothing until Nellie's scream woke her. The accounts were neat, almost too neat, and Imogen's pencil flew across her notebook. She noted inconsistencies. Clara's room was near the library, yet she heard nothing? Evelyn and Rupert's mutual alibi seemed rehearsed. And why had Nellie been eavesdropping? Dr. Vance called for calm, suggesting they retire until morning, when the police could be summoned. Reluctantly, the group dispersed, though sleep seemed a distant prospect. Imogen, however, did not go to her room. Instead, she lingered in the main hall, her lantern casting shadows on the oak paneling. The portrait gallery, where she'd been at midnight, was a long, narrow room lined with Haverford ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow her. She examined the floor, finding a faint scuff mark near a painting of Lady Beatrice's grandfather. It was fresh, suggesting someone had passed through recently, someone who hadn't admitted to being there. Her thoughts were interrupted by Clara, who appeared in her nightgown, a shawl draped over her shoulders. "You're not one for sleep, Miss Tate," Clara said, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. "Nor you, Miss Pembroke," Imogen replied. "What brings you here?" Clara hesitated, then said, "I couldn't rest, knowing Lady Beatrice's killer is among us. I've been thinking about her words at dinner, about a puzzle and buried truths. I believe she was hinting at something in the family papers. I found a reference today to a missing will, one that might disinherit the Haverfords entirely." Imogen's pulse quickened. "A will? Who benefits?" Clara shook her head. "The document is incomplete. But it mentions a distant cousin, long thought dead. If they're alive, they could claim everything." She paused, then added, I saw Evelyn in the library this afternoon, before dinner. She was rifling through the manuscripts. She didn't know I was there. The revelation hung between them. Before Imogen could press further, a creak echoed from the staircase. Both women froze, but no one appeared. Clara excused herself, and Imogen returned to her room, her mind ablaze with questions. A missing will, a secretive widow, a scuff mark in the gallery. What did it mean? The next morning, as dawn broke over the moors, the telephone line remained dead, and the storm showed no sign of abating. Over a tense breakfast, Dr. Vance announced he'd re-examined the library in daylight. The paperweight, he confirmed, was the murder weapon, its bloodied edge matching the wound. But he noticed something else. Lady Beatrice's emerald brooch was missing. The velvet throw had concealed its absence the night before. Gasps rippled through the room. Evelyn touched her own jewelry instinctively, while Rupert's face flushed. Mrs. Poole's eyes narrowed, and Finch dropped a teacup, the porcelain shattering on the floor. Imogen's gaze swept the table, noting every reaction. The brooch, a Haverford heirloom, was worth a fortune, but was its theft a motive, or a distraction? As the group debated what to do, Nellie burst in, her face ashen. "Sir, madam, there's something you must see! In the cellar!" Her voice trembled, and she wrung her apron. Dr. Vance and Imogen led the way, the others trailing behind. The cellar, accessed through a trapdoor in the kitchen, was damp and lined with wine racks. Nellie pointed to a crate in the corner, its lid ajar. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a bundle of yellowed papers, and atop them, glinting in the lantern's glow, was Lady Beatrice's emerald brooch. Part 3. The cellar of Larchwood Hall was a crypt of shadows, its air thick with the must of old wine and older secrets. The emerald brooch, nestled atop the bundle of papers in the open crate, seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its facets catching the lantern's feeble light. The group stood frozen, their breaths visible in the chill, as the implications of Nellie's discovery sank in. Lady Beatrice's murder, the missing brooch, and now this hidden cache, what thread bound them together? Dr. Lionel Vance was the first to move, his medical instincts overriding shock. "No one touch it," he ordered, his voice a low growl. "The police must see this as we found it." He knelt beside the crate, careful not to disturb its contents, and peered at the papers. "These look like legal documents. Miss Pembroke, you're the expert. Can you confirm?" Clara Pembroke, her spectacles fogging slightly in the damp, stepped forward. Her hands trembled as she lifted the oilcloth, revealing a stack of brittle, handwritten pages. "They're deeds and letters," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "And yes, there's the will I mentioned. It's dated 1890, signed by Lord Edmund Haverford, Lady Beatrice's father." She scanned the text, her lips moving silently, then gasped. "It names a beneficiary, a cousin, Margaret Haverford, presumed dead in a shipwreck. If she or her heirs survived, they inherit Larchwood Hall and all its holdings." A murmur rippled through the group. Evelyn Strathmore's sapphire eyes narrowed, her fingers tightening on her shawl. Rupert Caldwell's ruddy face paled, his signet ring twisting furiously. Imogen Tate, notebook in hand, scribbled furiously, her mind racing. A lost heir, a fortune at stake. Could this be the motive for murder? And why was the brooch here, as if deliberately placed? Mrs. Poole's voice cut through the tension, sharp as a blade. This is nonsense. Lady Beatrice was the last Haverford. Everyone knows that. These papers are forgeries, planted to stir trouble. Her loyalty to her mistress was palpable, but her eyes darted to Finch, who stood silently by the stairs, his face unreadable. Imogen crouched beside Clara, examining the crate. The brooch wasn't just dropped here, she said quietly. It's positioned like a marker. Someone wanted us to find this. She glanced at Nellie, who was wringing her hands. Nellie, how did you know to look in the cellar? The housemaid flushed, her voice barely a whisper. I was fetching coal for the kitchen fire. I saw the crate was open, and the brooch caught my eye. I swear I didn't touch it. Her panic seemed genuine, but Imogen noted the girl's proximity to the servants' hall, where she'd admitted to eavesdropping the previous night. Dr. Vance stood, brushing dust from his knees. We'll lock the cellar and wait for the police. But we must consider, whoever placed the brooch here knew about these papers. And they wanted them found, after Lady Beatrice's death. His gaze swept the group, lingering on Evelyn, who met his eyes with a cool defiance. Back in the drawing room, the atmosphere was electric with suspicion. The storm still raged outside, trapping them in a web of doubt. Rupert, attempting to lighten the mood, suggested a round of tea, but his forced cheer fell flat. Evelyn excused herself to freshen up, though Imogen noticed her linger by the staircase, her ear tilted toward the library door. Clara, clutching the oilcloth bundle she'd insisted on bringing it upstairs for safekeeping, sat poring over the will, muttering about codicils and signatures. Imogen approached Dr. Vance, who was staring into the fire. You knew Lady Beatrice years ago, didn't you? She asked, keeping her voice low. What was the debt you owed her? Vance's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. It was a private matter, from my student days. She helped me out of a difficulty. That's all you need to know. His curtness only fueled Imogen's curiosity, but before she could press, Mrs. Poole entered, announcing luncheon. The meal was a grim affair, the clink of cutlery loud in the silence. Mrs. Baxter's soup was tepid, her hands shaking as she served. Finch moved stiffly, his limp more pronounced, and Imogen caught him glancing at the brooch, now placed on a sideboard under Dr. Vance's watchful eye. Nellie avoided everyone's gaze, her apron stained with cold dust. The guests ate sparingly, each lost in thought. After lunch, Imogen slipped away to the portrait gallery, determined to revisit the scuff marks she'd found the previous night. The gallery was colder now, the storm's chill seeping through the walls. She knelt by the painting of Lady Beatrice's grandfather, tracing the mark, a faint arc, as if a shoe had scraped the floor. Nearby, she noticed a seam in the paneling, almost invisible unless one knew to look. Pressing it, she felt a click, and a narrow door swung open, revealing a spiral staircase descending into darkness. Her heart pounded. A secret passage in Larchwood Hall. It explained how someone could move unseen. She hesitated, then fetched a candle from a nearby sconce and descended. The stairs led to a low-ceilinged corridor, its walls damp and lined with cobwebs. It ended at another door, which opened into the library, behind a bookcase. Imogen's breath caught. This was how the killer had entered, or escaped, unnoticed. She returned to the drawing room, her discovery burning in her mind, but kept it to herself for now. The group had reconvened, and Clara was sharing her findings. "The will is authentic," she declared. "I've cross-referenced the signatures with other Haverford documents. But there's more, a letter from Margaret Haverford, dated 1895, claiming she survived the shipwreck and was living in obscurity in France. If she had children, they could be alive today." Rupert's laugh was nervous. "A long-lost heir? Sounds like a penny dreadful. Surely Lady Beatrice would have known if a cousin was out there. Unless someone hid the truth," Evelyn said, her voice silky. "Lady Beatrice was no fool. She invited us for a reason. Perhaps she suspected one of us knows about this Margaret." Her words hung in the air, and Imogen noticed Dr. Vance's hand clench. The conversation was interrupted by Finch, who entered with a grim expression. "There's a problem, sir," he said to Dr. Vance. "The cellar door, it's been forced open. The crate is empty." A collective gasp followed. "The papers, the brooch, gone." Mrs. Poole rounded on Nellie. "You were down there last. What did you do?" Nellie burst into tears, protesting her innocence. Dr. Vance called for order, but the room descended into chaos, accusations flying like sparks. Imogen slipped out, her instincts pulling her back to the library. If the killer had used the secret passage, they might have left a trace. In the library, she examined the bookcase where the passage opened. On the floor, half hidden by a rug, was a pearl earring, identical to the pair Evelyn had worn at dinner. Imogen pocketed it, her mind racing. Evelyn had claimed to be in her room at the time of the murder, yet this suggested otherwise. But was it proof of guilt, or a plan to incriminate her? As night fell, the group gathered for dinner, the absence of the brooch and papers a silent accusation. Imogen watched Evelyn closely, noting her calm demeanor, but also Rupert's increasing agitation. He spilled his wine twice, his hands unsteady. Clara, meanwhile, seemed distracted, her eyes flicking to the door as if expecting an intruder. Dr. Vance remained stoic, though Imogen caught him staring at the empty sideboard where the brooch had been. After dinner, Imogen confronted Clara in the hall. "You didn't tell the whole truth about the papers, did you? What else did you find?" Clara's face hardened. "You're too curious for your own good, Miss Tate. But since you ask, there was a second letter, one I didn't mention. It hinted at a scandal involving Margaret's child, born out of wedlock. If that child is alive, they'd have a claim, but their existence could ruin the Haverford name." She paused, then added, "I think Lady Beatrice was about to expose them. That's why she died." Imogen's mind whirled. A scandal, a hidden heir, a secret passage, and now Evelyn's earring. Each clue was a piece of the puzzle Lady Beatrice had spoken of. But as she retired to her room, locking the door against the unseen threat, she heard a faint creak from the passage behind the walls. Someone was moving in the dark, and the riddle of Larchwood Hall was far from solved. Part 4. The creak in the walls of Larchwood Hall lingered in Imogen Tate's mind like a half-remembered tune, a reminder that the manor's secrets were not confined to its papers or its people but woven into its very bones. She sat at her desk, the candle casting a trembling light over her notebook, where she'd sketched a timeline of the murder night and a map of the secret passage. The pearl earring, now hidden in her pocket, weighed heavily, its presence a silent accusation against Evelyn Strathmore. Yet Imogen's journalist instincts warned her against hasty conclusions. Agatha Christie's mysteries had taught her that the obvious clue was often the least trustworthy. Morning brought no relief to the stifling tension. The storm had weakened, but the telephone line remained dead, and the moors were a quagmire, delaying any hope of police intervention. Breakfast was a somber affair, the clatter of cutlery replaced by strained silence. Mrs. Baxter served burnt toast and watery eggs, her eyes red from sleeplessness or tears. Finch's limp seemed worse, his hands unsteady as he poured tea. Nellie avoided everyone, her coal-stained apron a badge of her earlier discovery. The guests, too, were frayed. Rupert Caldwell's forced jollity had vanished, his face sallow. Clara Pembroke clutched her satchel of notes, as if it were a lifeline. Evelyn's poise was brittle, her smiles too quick. Dr. Vance's calm was a mask, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm. Imogen broke the silence. "The papers and brooch are gone, but the killer is still here. We can't wait for the police, we must search the house." Her proposal drew sharp looks, particularly from Mrs. Poole, whose loyalty to Larchwood's sanctity bordered on fanaticism. "Search the house?" the housekeeper snapped. "You'll not rummage through Lady Beatrice's things like common thieves." Dr. Vance raised a hand. "Miss Tate is right. The stolen items may reveal the killer's intent. We'll pair up to avoid accusations of tampering. Miss Pembroke, you're with me. Mrs. Strathmore, with Mr. Caldwell. Miss Tate, take Finch. Mrs. Poole, stay with Nellie and Mrs. Baxter to ensure the staff quarters are covered." His tone was final, and even Mrs. Poole relented, though her keys jangled with indignation. Imogen and Finch began in the west wing, where the guest rooms were located. Finch's silence was oppressive, his eyes darting to every shadow. In Evelyn's room, Imogen found nothing unusual: silk dresses, a vanity cluttered with perfumes, a locked jewelry box. But the absence of the matching pearl earring was telling. In Rupert's room, a stack of books on rare manuscripts hinted at his obsession, but a crumpled letter in the waste-bin caught her eye. It was from a London dealer, warning Rupert of a debt. "Do immediately, or consequences will follow." Imogen pocketed it, glancing at Finch, who pretended not to notice. In Clara's room, Imogen found a locked trunk, which Finch opened with a skeleton key from his ring. Inside were more Haverford documents, including a family tree with Margaret Haverford's name circled in red ink. A note in Clara's precise hand read, "Possible descendant in London, 1920?" Imogen's pulse quickened. Clara was closer to the truth than she'd let on. The search yielded no brooch or papers, but the group reconvened in the drawing room with new suspicions. Clara reported finding a vial of sedative in Dr. Vance's medical bag, raising eyebrows. "It's for my patients," Vance said curtly, but his defensiveness was noted. Rupert admitted to finding a torn photograph in Evelyn's room, showing a younger Lady Beatrice with a man who resembled Evelyn's late husband. Evelyn laughed it off, claiming it was a coincidence, but her eyes betrayed unease. Imogen kept her discoveries private, instead steering the conversation to the secret passage. "I found a hidden staircase from the portrait gallery to the library," she said, watching for reactions. "Someone used it the night of the murder." Evelyn's hand froze on her teacup, Rupert coughed, and Clara's spectacles glinted with interest. Mrs. Poole, however, exploded. "A passage? Lies! I've served here 30 years and never heard of such a thing." Her vehemence was startling, and Imogen wondered if the housekeeper knew more than she admitted. Dr. Vance proposed exploring the passage, and the group, minus the staff, ventured to the portrait gallery. The hidden door yielded to Imogen's touch, and they descended the spiral stairs, lanterns casting grotesque shadows. The corridor was as Imogen remembered, damp, narrow, and oppressive. At the library end, behind the bookcase, they found a fresh scratch on the wood, as if something heavy had been dragged through. Rupert, sweating despite the cold, muttered about ghosts, but Imogen's mind was on the living. Back in the drawing room, Clara dropped a bombshell. "I've cross-referenced the will with the family tree. Margaret Haverford had a child, born in 1896, who was sent to an orphanage. I believe Lady Beatrice invited us because one of us is connected to that child. Perhaps even a descendant." Her words ignited chaos. Evelyn accused Clara of fabricating evidence to secure her own claim. Rupert stammered denials, his debt looming in Imogen's mind. Dr. Vance's silence was deafening, his debt to Lady Beatrice now a glaring question mark. Imogen slipped away during the argument, determined to confront Evelyn about the earring. She found her in the library, staring at the portrait of Lord Haverford. "You were here the night of the murder," Imogen said, holding up the pearl. "This was behind the bookcase." Evelyn's face was a mask of calm. "You're clever, Miss Tate, but wrong. I lost that earring days ago. Someone must have taken it to frame me." Her voice was steady, but her eyes flicked to the door, as if expecting rescue or escape. Before Imogen could press further, a shout came from the hall. Nellie, hysterical, was pointing at the chandelier, where a glint of green caught the light. There, tangled in the crystals, was Lady Beatrice's emerald brooch, as if mocking their efforts. Dr. Vance climbed a ladder to retrieve it, confirming it was the real thing. But the papers remained missing, and the brooch's bizarre placement suggested a mind both cunning and theatrical. That evening, over a tense dinner, Imogen pieced together the clues: the passage, the earring, Rupert's debt, Clara's research, Vance's secrecy, Evelyn's past, and now the brooch's taunting reappearance. Mrs. Poole's hostility, Finch's nervousness, and Nellie's eavesdropping added layers of doubt. But it was Clara's next revelation that shifted the game. "I found a coded note in the will's margin," she whispered to Imogen as they cleared the table. "It points to a hidden compartment in Lady Beatrice's study. I haven't told the others. It could be dangerous." Imogen agreed to meet her there after midnight, sensing the truth was close. At the appointed hour, Imogen crept to the study, a small room off the main hall, its walls lined with books and a desk cluttered with manuscripts. Clara was already there, prying at a panel behind a bust of Shakespeare. It sprang open, revealing a velvet pouch. Inside was a single page, a birth certificate for a child named Beatrice Margaret, born 1896 to Margaret Haverford, father unknown. The implications were staggering. Lady Beatrice herself might have been the illegitimate heir, her title a fraud. Before they could process this, a shadow moved in the doorway. It was Finch, his face pale, a candlestick raised like a weapon. "You shouldn't have meddled," he hissed, his limp gone, his voice steady. Imogen grabbed Clara's arm, pulling her back as Finch advanced. But a cry from the hall stopped him, Mrs. Poole, clutching a poker, her eyes wild. "Thomas, stop!" she shrieked. "It's gone too far." Finch froze, and in that moment, Imogen and Clara bolted, locking the study door behind them. They raced to the drawing room, where the others were gathered, and Imogen blurted out the truth. Finch was no cripple, and he'd tried to attack them. The group turned on Finch, who'd followed, now limping again, his face a mask of defiance. Mrs. Poole collapsed, sobbing, muttering about protecting the family. Dr. Vance restrained Finch, but Imogen's mind was elsewhere. The birth certificate, Finch's betrayal, the brooch's theatrics. Someone was orchestrating this, and Finch was only a pawn. As the night deepened, Imogen knew the killer was watching, waiting for the next move in this deadly game of riddles. Part 5. The drawing room of Larchwood Hall was a crucible of fear and accusation as the night wore on, the storm outside now a dull roar, as if the moors themselves were tiring of the manor's secrets. Thomas Finch stood by the fireplace, his wrists bound with a curtain cord under Dr. Lionel Vance's stern supervision. The butler's limp had vanished, his earlier menace replaced by a sullen silence. Mrs. Agnes Poole sat crumpled in an armchair, her face buried in her hands, her muttered pleas for forgiveness barely audible. The emerald brooch, retrieved from the chandelier, lay on a side table, its green fire a silent witness to the chaos. Imogen Tate's heart raced, the birth certificate, naming Lady Beatrice as Margaret Haverford's illegitimate daughter, burning in her pocket like a live coal. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they formed was still maddeningly incomplete. Clara Pembroke, her composure frayed but intact, clutched her satchel of notes, her spectacles glinting with resolve. "We must interrogate Finch," she said, her voice cutting through the room's tension. "He tried to harm us, and Mrs. Poole knows why. They're hiding something. Something worth killing for." Evelyn Strathmore, perched on a sofa, arched an eyebrow. "Indeed. But let's not forget the broader canvas. A will, a secret heir, a passage, and now this theatricality with the brooch. Someone is playing a game, and Finch doesn't strike me as the mastermind." Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the room for weaknesses. Rupert Caldwell, his ruddy cheeks drained of color, twisted his signet ring furiously. "This is madness. A butler, a killer? I say we lock him in the cellar and wait for the police. Debts or no debts, I'm no murderer." His outburst drew glances. Imogen hadn't shared the letter about his debts, but his panic suggested he feared exposure. Imogen stepped forward, her journalist's instincts overriding caution. "Finch, why did you attack us? And why did Mrs. Poole stop you? What's the secret you're both protecting?" Her green eyes locked onto his, searching for a crack in his defiance. Finch's jaw tightened, but Mrs. Poole's sob broke the silence. "It was for her," she cried, her voice raw. For Lady Beatrice. She made us swear, years ago, to keep her shame hidden. That certificate, it would have ruined her, ruined the Haverford name." Her words spilled like a dam bursting, and the room leaned in, breathless. "Explain," Dr. Vance said, his tone clinical but his eyes intense. "What shame?" Mrs. Poole wiped her eyes, her keys clinking at her waist. "Lady Beatrice was no true Haverford. She was Margaret's child, born in sin. Margaret survived the shipwreck, came back in secret, and left the babe with Lord Edmund. He raised her as his own, but the truth was in those papers. Beatrice found out in her youth, and she made us bury it. Finch and I, we swore to protect her." Finch's voice was low, almost a growl. "She was our lady. We'd do anything for her. When she invited you lot, she said she'd reveal the truth, give up the estate to some cousin's heir. We couldn't let that happen. The Haverfords are Larchwood." A chill ran through Imogen. Lady Beatrice's cryptic dinner speech, about puzzles and buried truths, now made sense. She'd planned to expose her own illegitimacy, perhaps to atone or to right a wrong. But someone had silenced her first. "Did you kill her?" Imogen asked Finch directly. He shook his head, his eyes fierce. "I didn't. I'd have died for her. But those papers. I moved them to the cellar, to keep them safe. The brooch was to throw you off. I didn't know who'd find it." Mrs. Poole nodded, her voice trembling. "We only wanted to protect her memory. But someone else, someone new." The room erupted in questions, but Imogen's mind was elsewhere. Finch's story rang true. He was loyal, not cunning. The brooch's placement in the chandelier, the earring in the passage, the stolen papers, these were the work of a calculating mind, not a desperate servant. She glanced at the guests. Clara, obsessed with lineage, Evelyn, with her murky past, Rupert, drowning in debt, Vance, bound by an old debt. One of them was the puppeteer. Dr. Vance took charge. "We'll keep Finch secured until morning. Mrs. Poole, you'll stay with Nellie and Mrs. Baxter. The rest of us will search again, every room, every nook. The papers are the key." His authority steadied the group, though Imogen noted his reluctance to meet her gaze. The search resumed, but Imogen lagged behind, slipping into Lady Beatrice's study. The hidden compartment was empty now, but the desk held a locked drawer. Using a hairpin, she pried it open, revealing a journal in Lady Beatrice's precise hand. The final entry, dated the day before the murder, read, "I have invited them to unmask the truth. One knows more than they admit. My mother's shadow follows them. If I fall, let the riddle be solved." Imogen's breath caught. Lady Beatrice had known her killer, or suspected them. She rejoined the others, who'd found nothing but dust and dead ends. Rupert, increasingly erratic, suggested burning the house to end the curse, earning a sharp rebuke from Clara. Evelyn, meanwhile, was caught lingering near the library, claiming she'd misplaced a glove. Imogen's suspicion deepened, but the earring alone wasn't proof. That afternoon, Nellie approached Imogen in the hall, her voice a whisper. "Miss, I heard something last night, before the scream. Voices in the library, Lady Beatrice and a man. They were arguing, about money and promises. I couldn't see who, but he sounded angry. Her fear was palpable, and Imogen pressed her gently. Could it have been Dr. Vance? Or Mr. Caldwell? Nellie shook her head, uncertain, and scurried off when Mrs. Baxter called her. Imogen confronted Vance privately, sharing Nellie's story. You owed Lady Beatrice a debt. Was it money? Did she threaten to call it in? Vance's face darkened, but he sighed, relenting. Not money, he said. In my youth I forged a medical certificate for her, to hide her mother's survival. It secured her inheritance. She held it over me, but I didn't kill her. I was grateful, in my way. His confession was a piece of the puzzle, but not the solution. As night fell, Imogen gathered the guests in the drawing room, determined to force the truth. She laid out the clues. The passage, the earring, the brooch, the certificate, the journal. Lady Beatrice invited us to solve a riddle, she said. She knew her secret would draw out her killer. One of you argued with her that night, about money, promises, or the Haverford legacy. Evelyn laughed, a brittle sound. You're quite the detective, Miss Tate. But you're fishing. I was in my room, as I said. Rupert stammered agreement with his alibi. While Clara's silence was telling, she was calculating, not denying. Then Clara spoke, her voice cold. I found something in the papers before they were stolen. A letter from Margaret to a lover, initialed LV, Dr. Vance. Was that you? The room froze. Vance's face was ashen, but he shook his head. Not me. My father, perhaps. He knew Margaret in France. But he died in '98. I'm no heir. His denial was plausible, but Imogen sensed a half-truth. Before she could press, a crash echoed from upstairs. The group raced to the source. Lady Beatrice's bedroom, where a window had been smashed, the curtains billowing in the wind. On the floor lay the missing papers, scattered as if thrown. But what caught Imogen's eye was a single page, clutched in Rupert's hand as he stood trembling by the bed. It was a loan agreement, signed by Lady Beatrice, forgiving a debt of £10,000 to Rupert Caldwell. You lied! Imogen snapped. You owed her money, and she was going to expose you. Rupert dropped the paper, his face crumpling. I didn't kill her, he wailed. She forgave the debt, said she'd burn the note. I was desperate, yes, but I loved her collection. I'd never harm her. His panic was convincing, but Imogen wasn't sure. As Dr. Vance secured the papers, Imogen noticed Evelyn slip away. She followed, catching her in the portrait gallery, prying at the hidden door. Running, Mrs. Strathmore? Imogen asked, her voice sharp. Evelyn turned, her smile icy. Merely curious. But you're close, Miss Tate. Too close. Her words were a threat, and Imogen knew the final act was near. Part 6. The portrait gallery of Larchwood Hall was a tunnel of shadows, the eyes of Haverford ancestors glinting in the lantern's glow as Imogen Tate faced Evelyn Strathmore. The hidden door to the secret passage stood ajar, a silent invitation to truths buried in the manor's depths. Evelyn's icy smile held a predator's confidence, but Imogen's resolve was iron. She had chased stories through London's darkest corners, and this riddle would not defeat her. The birth certificate, the emerald brooch, the passage, the earring, and now Evelyn's veiled threat formed a constellation of clues, pointing to a single, inevitable truth. "You know more than you've admitted," Imogen said, her voice steady despite the chill in her spine. "Lady Beatrice's journal said someone carried her mother's shadow. That's you, isn't it? You're connected to Margaret Haverford." Evelyn's laugh was sharp, like glass breaking. "You're clever, Miss Tate, but you're weaving fiction. I'm a widow with a taste for adventure, nothing more. If you've evidence, produce it." Her hand rested lightly on the door, as if poised to flee, or strike. Before Imogen could respond, footsteps echoed from the hall. Dr. Lionel Vance appeared, his face grim, followed by Clara Pembroke, Rupert Caldwell, and Mrs. Poole, who clutched her keys like a talisman. "We heard voices," Vance said, his eyes narrowing at Evelyn. "What's this about?" Imogen seized the moment. "It's time to end this. Gather everyone in the drawing room. Finch, Nellie, Mrs. Baxter, too. Lady Beatrice's riddle is solved." Her certainty was a bluff, but she sensed the killer's nerve was fraying. Evelyn's smile faltered, and she followed the group without protest. The drawing room was a stage for the final act, the fire casting long shadows over the assembled company. Finch, still bound, sat under Vance's watch. Mrs. Poole hovered near Nellie, who trembled beside Mrs. Baxter. Rupert mopped his brow, his debt now an open wound. Clara's spectacles gleamed with anticipation, her satchel open, ready to record the truth. Evelyn sat poised, a queen awaiting judgment, but her fingers betrayed her, twisting her pearls. Imogen stood by the fireplace, the emerald brooch in her hand. "Lady Beatrice invited us to solve a puzzle," she began, her voice clear. "She knew her secret, that she was Margaret Haverford's illegitimate daughter, would draw out her killer. She planned to reveal it, perhaps to cede the estate to a rightful heir. But someone couldn't let that happen. Let's unravel the clues." She held up the brooch. "This was stolen, then placed in the chandelier, a theatrical distraction. Only someone with flair for drama would do that." Her eyes flicked Evelyn, who didn't flinch. The pearl earring in the passage suggested Mrs. Strathmore, but it was too convenient, planted, I suspect, to mislead us. Next, she produced the birth certificate. This proves Lady Beatrice's illegitimacy. Clara found it, but someone else knew of it, someone who feared its exposure. Finch and Mrs. Poole hid the papers to protect their lady's honor, but they didn't kill her. Finch's attack was desperation, not murder. She turned to Rupert. "Mr. Caldwell, your debt to Lady Beatrice was forgiven, yet you lied about it. You feared ruin, but you're no killer. Your panic is too genuine." Rupert sagged, relief mixing with shame. Dr. Vance was next. "You owed Lady Beatrice a debt, not money but a forged certificate that secured her inheritance. You had reason to fear her revelation, but your guilt is in the past, not the present." Vance nodded, his face etched with regret. Imogen's gaze settled on Clara. "Miss Pembroke, you're obsessed with lineage. You found the will and suspected a living heir. But your ambition is scholarly, not murderous. You wanted the truth, not blood." Clara adjusted her spectacles, a faint smile acknowledging the truth. Finally, Imogen faced Evelyn. "Mrs. Strathmore, you're the shadow of Margaret Haverford. Your late husband was her son, born in France, hidden to avoid scandal. You knew Lady Beatrice was illegitimate, and you came to claim the estate for yourself, as his widow. Nellie heard you arguing with Lady Beatrice that night, about money and promises. You demanded she acknowledge your claim, but she refused. Evelyn's composure cracked, her eyes blazing. Prove it, you little scribbler. Imogen held up the journal. Lady Beatrice wrote of a shadow from her mother's past. Your husband's photograph, torn but recognizable, was in your room. The papers Clara found mentioned Margaret's lover, initialed P.S., your husband, Paul Strathmore. You used the secret passage to enter the library, struck Lady Beatrice with the paperweight, and planted the earring to frame yourself, knowing we'd dismiss it as too obvious. The brooch in the chandelier was your flourish, a taunt to us all. The room was silent, the weight of truth pressing down. Evelyn rose, her voice venomous. You're guessing. I was in my room, no. Nellie whispered, stepping forward. I saw you, ma'am, in the hall before the scream, near the gallery. I was too scared to say. Her courage broke the dam. Evelyn lunged for the door, but Vance was faster, blocking her path. It's over, he said, his voice heavy. Mrs. Poole sobbed, clutching Nellie, while Finch hung his head. Rupert and Clara exchanged stunned glances, the puzzle complete. Imogen continued, tying the threads. Evelyn killed Lady Beatrice to silence her, then manipulated the clues to confuse us. The papers were stolen to delay the truth, but she underestimated Clara's diligence and Nellie's honesty. The riddle was Lady Beatrice's trap, and Evelyn walked into it. As Vance restrained Evelyn, who spat curses but ceased struggling, Imogen felt a pang of sadness. Lady Beatrice had orchestrated her own unmasking, knowing it might cost her life. The storm had cleared, and by morning the police would come, confirming Evelyn's guilt with the evidence Imogen had preserved. The group dispersed, shaken but relieved. Imogen sat alone in the library, the portrait of Lord Haverford watching her. She penned her story for the Clarion, not of scandal but of a woman who faced her truth, and a killer who couldn't escape it. Larchwood Hall, with its secrets and shadows, would fade into legend, but its riddle was solved, and Imogen Tate had earned her byline. Thank you for joining us in unraveling the riddle of Larchwood Hall. If you enjoyed this tale of intrigue and deduction, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to Porchlight Tales for more captivating mysteries. Your support keeps the stories alive.